haven't always been pissed off. I haven't always been mad, you know. Came to a boiling point for me, you know what I mean? I've been through so much stuff in my life that, you know, I kind of reached a point where I was just fed up, you know, and just got tired of it.
Eminem's 12th album, The Death of Slim Shady, is finally out, and the entire narrative from Eminem fans is that Eminem is getting cancelled. If you open up TikTok and search for Eminem, the top result is going to be a 43-year-old lady named Ashley lip-syncing along to Eminem rapping about Bruce Jenner and throwing midgets with text on the screen that says, "They can't cancel this, just try me, you Gen Z snowflakes." Gen Z cancellation, controversy, offensive, this and that, but in reality, it's crickets. Genuinely, no one cares. I don't mean that no one cares about Eminem. He's actually still huge. He's the biggest rapper alive with more monthly listeners than Drake. The album rollout for The Death of Slim Shady broke streaming records, with Houdini being the fastest growing rap song of all time. Somehow, Eminem is still loved and relevant 25 years into his career. But all of that, and the one thing he isn't, is controversial. At one point, he definitely was, but now he's an old man yelling at clouds about how many enemies he has, when in reality, he's still one of the most legendary rappers ever. And that's one of the big reasons why a lot of his music in the last 10 or 15 years has been really bad. Because I believe that while the persona of Slim Shady was the reason for Eminem's success in the first place, making him blow up and become an icon, it was also the reason a lot of his music has become pretty bad. Slim Shady damaged Eminem's ability to make good music. But this new album and its concept of killing off Slim Shady might cause Eminem to finally outgrow his past and make good art. But there's also a chance it might not. If you know the real story, you'd know it's a difficult past to outgrow. Because Eminem is 52 years old and an undeniable legend of hip-hop. His work from 1999 to 2004 fundamentally changed pop culture permanently. The Marshall Mathers LP is one of the best hip-hop albums ever. Some of the greatest rappers today consider Eminem one of their primary inspirations. But nowadays, Eminem is also perhaps the most disrespected rapper alive, maybe even more than Drake. Because while he yells and rants and raps about how the new generation is trying to cancel him for being offensive, in reality, no one cares much at all besides to maybe laugh or make a meme about how he's so out of touch. So how did Slim Shady ruin Eminem, and why is Gen Z supposedly canceling him? The Spirit of Creativity, which is the latest piece from my jewelry line, is finally back in stock. I made this brand and these necklaces to remind everyone that the only way to reach your goal is to just keep going. The jewelry is a meaningful reminder that the journey of life is the reward. The Spirit of Creativity is a solid silver pendant painted with a brilliant blue enamel background and fastened with deep blue gemstones, and we just relaunched it after we completely sold out last month. I've been on YouTube inspiring people with stories for 5 years now, and I'm making my own creations and my own brand to continue that mission. I've seen enough to know that you aren't going to get lucky. You aren't going to blow up overnight. You aren't going to walk into heaven without having gone through hell to get there. That's why I wear these necklaces every single day. The power of the necklace reminds me that the only thing crazier than focusing on my goals is sitting on my ass doing nothing. We're all sitting here watching videos about successful artists and people who make music that changes the world. I want to motivate all of you to pursue your own dreams and never give up. Shipping is free in the US forever, so go to spiritworld.store to buy a necklace now, or stick till the end for a discount code that's just for my viewers. 1996 was a rough year for Marshall Mathers. His debut record, Infinite, was a failure. It barely sold 1,000 copies, and not even the smaller DJs from Detroit wanted to play it on the radio, let alone reaching an audience from outside his own local area. After grinding through the Detroit battle rap scene and making mixtapes since he was a teenager in the late 80s, in 1996, 24-year-old Marshall was finally ready to make his debut album. A local indie label had saved up enough money to build their own studio and help him produce it, but Infinite failed miserably, and 9 years of work and passion went down the drain. Not only did it go largely unnoticed, but a lot of people who did listen to it thought it was weak. In 1996, being a white rapper was almost blasphemous. It's still pretty controversial today, but back then there was no G-Eazy, there was no Jack Harlow, there was no Wiki, there was no Eminem. Vanilla Ice was seen as a giant grifter and a scammer, and even well-liked groups like the Beastie Boys and House of Pain were considered novelty acts that were focused on blending hip-hop with rock and other genres, not actually making serious rap songs. So expectations for Eminem were pretty low, and the blandness of Infinite wasn't doing Marshall any favors. Adding to his problems, he had just discovered that the major label A&R, who had been promising him a record deal, was in fact an imposter working in the label building's mailroom sorting letters. Marshall thinks about his life. His daughter Haley is about to have her first birthday, and he only has $40 to his name. He can't even buy her a gift. On top of it all, it's the holiday season, and he just lost his job washing dishes at a restaurant a few days before Christmas. And then there's the evictions and the constant moving, one rundown neighborhood full of violence and drugs to the next. Marshall doesn't have a stable place to stay. In a lot of ways, he felt like a loser. He had failed at providing for his daughter, his relationship with his girlfriend Kim was suffering, his rap career was going nowhere, and he even messed up his suicide attempt. You know who didn't fail at their attempt though? The guy who introduced Marshall to hip-hop. His uncle Ronnie. He was the same age as Marshall, and one of the few people who truly cared for him, but he had killed himself 5 years ago at age 19 while dealing with heartbreak over his ex-girlfriend.
Well, life's hard, bud.
It sounds like a pretty crazy family, and maybe that was it. Crazy family with crazy genes. Maybe that's why Marshall was in this situation to begin with. So when young Marshall thinks about his family, all he can remember is generations of abuse, misery, and tragedy. Marshall's grandmother was abused by her mother. Marshall's mother was abused by one of her stepfathers. And Marshall, he was abused by his own mother. As for his father, Marshall never knew him. All he knew was that his father, Marshall Bruce Mathers II, named his son after himself and then abandoned him and his mother when he was a year old. At the same time though, Marshall tried to keep going, at the very least because he had a little kid to take care of. Besides, life wasn't all bad. At least he still enjoyed rapping. It gave him a sense of purpose, something to be good at, people to be around, and a way to express his feelings. So Marshall just kept going as much as he could. Despite his house getting robbed, needing to move his family into a mobile home with his abusive mother to survive, despite getting fired and every other horrible thing that could possibly happen, music gave him a reason to keep pushing, even though that felt like a failure too. When Marshall rapped about his pain and struggles, people yawned. When Marshall expressed his love for his family, especially his daughter, they turned on another station.
Infinite. You heard of hell while I was sent for me. I went to it serving a sentence for murdering instruments. Now I'm trying to repent for me. But when I hear the beat, I'm tempted to make another attempt at it. I'm infinite.
The disappointment and rejection he felt after releasing Infinite culminated into more of a feeling of anger, and in a moment of revelation, it came to him that Marshall was weak and boring. So one day, very suddenly and famously, while he was just in the bathroom sitting on the toilet, he thought of the name Slim Shady, and suddenly, a new alter ego that would empower him to stand up to his critics and overcome his lifelong struggles was born. As a child, he would draw sketches of comic book heroes. It made him feel powerful, or rather, just not as powerless as he did, being a kid with so many problems to face in his life far before he ever should have.
A lot of times kids, when they feel like their external world is impoverished or they feel neglected, they need to feel big and powerful and strong. And they can feel big and powerful and strong by associating with X-Man, by associating with Batman and Superman, because they have superpowers then. So it really helps them feel like, okay, maybe I'm not so small, maybe I'm not being as abused as much, maybe the world can be okay because I can be He-Man.
And he was bringing that energy forward now as he got the idea to rap like he was someone else, a villain called Slim Shady.
After that record, every rhyme I wrote got angrier and angrier. A lot of it was because of the feedback I got. Motherfuckers was like, you're a white boy, what the fuck are you rapping for? Why don't you go into rock and roll? All that type of shit started pissing me off.
Slim Shady comes out of the gate rapping like a demon with nothing to lose. If life was miserable, he would fuck things up even more. Slim Shady would never suffer in silence. He'd make everyone else around him suffer too. The only rule was to make it funny. His friends found it hilarious and energetic. His girlfriend found it horrifying. Life was still shitty, but at least his new material was fire. And then in December of 1997, about a year after Marshall almost died at the lowest moment of his life, the Slim Shady EP was released. And this was at the same time as the 1997 Rap Olympics, a battle rap tournament in LA that Marshall spent money he didn't have to travel to and compete in. His new hostile yet funny Slim Shady style did great, and he placed second. The crowd went nuts.
Get a clean cross to wipe this bloody video screen off! Flawless victory! Eminem, stop! Give me that motherfucking mic!
And in that crowd stood an intern from Interscope Records, this time a real one. He approached Marshall and asked if he had any CDs or cassettes. Marshall, of course, gave him a copy of the EP, which the intern took back and eventually got into the hands of Dr. Dre. And Dr. Dre said this.
What the fuck and who the fuck is that? Rewind that. Play that again.
Dre only wanted one thing, to meet Eminem immediately. And before long, they started working on a big album, improving a few songs from the EP, as well as making a bunch of brand new ones. And so a little later, in the start of 1999, about 2 years after Marshall almost died, the Slim Shady LP was released. Eminem, Marshall Mathers, Slim Shady. Whoever he was, his entire life was about to go through a psychotic change. The Slim Shady LP changed the game. It was certified platinum within 2 months and it even won Best Rap Album of the Year at the Grammys. Eminem instantly became an A-list star. But what kind of A-list star? One of the reasons the album was such a huge hit came from the novelty of a white guy rapping. But that wasn't all. Eminem also happened to be ridiculously creative and fresh on top of that. Rolling Stone magazine said this: Eminem isn't trying to be Jay-Z, DMX, or Tupac. He's trying to be the Roadrunner. He's also probably the only MC in 1999 who boasts low self-esteem. His rhymes are jaw-droppingly perverse, bespeaking a minimum wage life devoid of hope, flushed with rage, and weaned on sci-fi and slasher movies.
My nerves hurt, and lately I'm on edge. Rap Vanilla Ice and ripped out his blonde dreads. Every girl I ever went out with is gone Les. Follow me and do exactly what the song says. Smoke weed, take pills, drop out of school, kill people and drink, jump behind the wheel like it was still legal. I'm dumb enough to walk in a store and steal, so I'm dumb enough to ask for a date with Lauryn Hill.
Even beyond the cartoonish shock value lyrics though, Eminem creates vivid worlds of unique details and descriptions. Plus, musically, the album is great. It's exciting and poppy, yet skillful at the same time. Most importantly to the Slim Shady LP was the character itself, which while audacious and wild, was only nominally different from Eminem's real life. Finally, his personalities could shine. The jester, the self-loathing critic, the humorist, the guy who fantasizes about murder, most of all, the guy who's clearly been through a lot, despite often coming off as a kid trapped in an adult's body. Eminem's music was clearly true to his gritty life experience, but even beyond that, people found themselves drawn to the energy of the music, no matter if they related to him or not. The character was just that crazy.
When you see me on your block with 2 blocks, screaming fuck the world like Tupac, I just don't give a fuck. Talking that shit behind my back, dirty Mac and telling your boys that I'm on crack, I just don't give a fuck. So put my tape back on the rack, go run and tell your friends my shit is whack, I just don't give a fuck. But see me on the street and duck, cause you gon' get stuck, stoned and snuck, cause I just don't give a fuck.
But it remained clear that Slim Shady was an exaggerated persona, not Eminem's true self. All of the cartoonishly gross violence, the sex jokes, the nasty comments, the swearing, it obviously wasn't meant to be taken seriously. But at the same time, strangely enough, a lot of the details in the Slim Shady LP are 100% autobiographical. This lyric from the song My Name Is might be shocking at first, but it's also the sad reality of Eminem's life.
When I was little, I used to get so hungry I would throw fits. How you gonna breastfeed me, mom? You ain't got no tits.
When he was a baby, his mother had blood poisoning and couldn't breastfeed him. In the same way, the song Brain Damage comically depicts an emergency room situation where doctors consider shock therapy for an unresponsive Eminem. The narrative unfolds, though, revealing incidents of regular assault at school when Eminem was a kid, especially by a classmate named D'Angelo Bailey, who once beat Eminem until he couldn't move. The stuff in this song is again terrible, but also mostly true. D'Angelo Bailey is a real person that actually beat Eminem in school. The first lie in this song is that in reality though, Eminem didn't play dead by holding his breath. He actually almost fell into a coma and only survived after being admitted to the emergency room. The part where Slim Shady comes in and gets revenge though, that's the one thing that never actually happened. Some songs blur the lines even more, like 97 Bonnie and Clyde.
Don't you wanna help Dada build a sandcastle? And Mama said she wants to show you how far she can float. And don't worry about that little boo-boo on her throat. It's just a little scratch, it don't hurt. Her was eating dinner while you was sweeping and spilled ketchup on her shirt. Mama's messy, ain't she? We'll let it wash off in the water and me and you can play by ourselves, can't we?
And that song is about me murdering my daughter's mother, putting them in the trunk. And at the time when I wrote that song, I really felt like I wanted to do that. And that's why again I say my music is therapy for me. It's a way to get stuff off my chest.
When you realize that Eminem's songwriting as Slim Shady isn't a fantasy, but actually in a way his own life story, it becomes a weird situation to find enjoyment in these upbeat songs that sound like satire or comedy, but are actually confessions of a lot of Eminem's darkest thoughts and real experiences. Watching Eminem only receive recognition once he started pouring salt in his wounds in front of the whole world, on the surface it's funny, but if you look deeper, the meaning of the music changes completely. Take a listen to Rock Bottom, the first song he wrote after his attempt in 1996.
Life is full of empty promises and broken dreams. I'm hoping things look up, but there ain't no job openings. I feel discouraged, hungry and malnourished. Living in this house with no furnace, unfurnished. And I'm sick of working dead-end jobs with lame pay. And I'm tired of being hired and fired the same day. But fuck it, if you know the rules to the game, play. 'Cause when we die, we know we all going the same way.
Publicly sharing all of this extremely personal stuff and blowing up overnight with it is bound to take a toll on you and everyone in your life, especially because Eminem channeling his true self through Slim Shady didn't exactly feel like someone sharing lessons they learned long ago or healing from their trauma at all. And so before long, it makes sense that Eminem's raw, unhealed past wounds would open again. Slim Shady was so ostentatious that the real Marshall Mathers was starting to disappear into the absurdity, but sooner or later, he would be forced to face the truth anyway. From being abandoned, battered, unlucky, unloved, and poor for the first 26 years of his life, to all of a sudden everyone being in love with him, being a rising star making money that he never could have imagined, it sounds too good to be true. And maybe it was. Family members that he never knew before were popping out and asking for favors. People from his past started chasing after his newfound fame and fortune, and even his own mother served him with a $10 million lawsuit after he released a song describing her as a manipulative, mentally ill drug addict. Exposing the darkest moments from his personal life added to the realism and impact of the music, even going so far as to name real people and events in his songs. It was empowering and authentic, the opposite of the fake plastic world of entertainment. It's admirable to be that real. It's a type of honesty that most people can't or won't share. Still though, most people hearing Eminem pour his heart out wouldn't necessarily understand that what they were hearing is real, especially when it's coming out in the funny, edgy, Slim Shady way. And so after everyone's had their shits and giggles, at the most appreciating his transparency and at the least seeing his music as a mildly humorous clown show, it was Marshall who needed to pick up the still broken pieces of his life after the Slim Shady mask comes off. He needed a type of healing that money can't buy.
When Haley gets old enough, I'm going to explain it to her. I'll let her know that Mommy and Daddy weren't getting along at the time. None of it was to be taken literally.
For now though, real love or not, he was widely desired and admired. Even the hate he got, whether for his obscene content or being a white guy in a black genre, made his growing fan base celebrate him more. This put Marshall in a tricky situation. On one side, he was concerned about negativity. His life was becoming a spectacle, destroyed relationships, drug problems. Finally, he had money, fame, and the stability that comes with that. But it could all go away if he didn't keep entertaining and selling. He was always miserable and angry. Now he's making money from his misery and anger. So, rich or not, he's still the same person you were before, with the same exact problems. His brief time as the goofy cartoon character of Slim Shady had made him famous, but it only complicated his life even further, and now he needed to get real. He dropped the facade and called it the Marshall Mathers LP. This is his story. So how did that massive change in direction lead to the album selling 1.8 million copies in its first week? After the breakthrough of his debut album, fans wondered how Eminem's music would change now that he was no longer poor, and how would he deal with the serious backlash against his graphic subject matter. On the surface, the Marshall Mathers LP sounds like Eminem doubling down on controversy, but it's actually about the constant, real fight between choosing his sanity or performing for the crowd, even at the cost of torturing himself. All of this becomes more profound when you remember that every song is more autobiographical than you realize. The Marshall Mathers LP starts with a public service announcement. In the Slim Shady LP, he said to the kids, "Don't try this at home." But this time, it's a little different.
Slim Shady does not give a fuck what you think. If you don't like it, you can suck his fucking cock. Little did you know, upon purchasing this album, you have just kissed his ass. Slim Shady is fed up with your shit, and he's going to kill you.
The album still has more than enough of the Slim Shady horror tracks, even more polished and well-crafted than before. The first song, Kill You, is a war declaration against the female human species, starting with Marshall's own mother. You hear the worst kind of violence and offenses, but obviously it's an exaggerated response to the media backlash.
I'ma kill you. You don't wanna fuck with me. Girls need you ain't nothing but a slut to me. Bitch, I'ma kill you. You ain't got the balls to beef. We ain't gonna never stop beef, and I don't squash the beef. You better kill me. I'ma be another rapper dead for popping off at the mouth with shit I shouldn't have said. But when they kill me,
But there's also tracks from the perspective of the actual guy caught up in this toxic fame frenzy. Marshall Mathers, The Way I Am, these are tracks about his inability to emotionally process the fame, not just with people in his life, but also about the psychotic fans who have become either destructive to him or to themselves. This album introduced a new term to pop culture vocabulary with the song Stan, a musically beautiful track that tells the story of a crazed fan who mirrors Slim Shady's actions from 97 Bonnie and Clyde by putting his pregnant wife in the trunk of his car and driving into the ocean because Eminem won't write him back.
I love you, Slim. We could have been together. Think about it. You ruined it now. I hope you can't sleep and you dream about it. And when you dream, I hope you can't sleep and you scream about it. I hope your conscience eats at you when you can't breathe without me.
The song Kim is the plot prequel to 97 Bonnie and Clyde, the fight leading to the body in the car trunk. Beyond the writing and disturbing sound design, Eminem's storytelling is aided with manic delivery that sits at the cusp of anguish and rage. It's genuinely hard to believe he's just acting.
I should have known better when you started to act weird. We could have. Hey, where you going? Get back here. You can't run from me, Kim. It's just us, nobody else. You're only making this harder on yourself. I gotcha. Go ahead, yell. Here, I'll scream with you.
In my mind, the Marshall Mathers LP is Eminem's best work. A lot of people feel like it's one of the greatest hip-hop albums ever. It's easy to see how this album influenced countless other artists, including some of the greatest modern rappers, like Kendrick Lamar, who often lists Eminem as one of his favorite artists ever. The short-term cultural impact that Eminem achieved with the Marshall Mathers LP was to inspire a new audience of people like never before, mainly politicians. Canadian Attorney General Jim Flaherty was inspired to try and ban Eminem from entering Toronto, and Lynn Cheney, the Second Lady of the US, was inspired to write to the executives of Interscope Records as well as government departments to impose strict age restrictions on the consumption of Eminem's music.
Talk about shocking. Rapper Eminem stages a mock electrocution of Vice President Dick Cheney in his latest music video.
Come on, Dick. Come on your lips.
And you won't believe who's next in line for a rap attack, the Vice President's wife, Lynn Cheney. Eminem, whose given name is Marshall Mathers, is apparently still smarting after Mrs. Cheney singled him out in Senate testimony 2 years ago.
He is a violent misogynist. He advocates raping and murdering his mother in one of his songs. He glories in the same song in the idea that he might murder any woman he comes across.
Eminem's authenticity made him an icon. He was able to speak his mind in a way that other celebrities never would. His need to say things that offended, disgusted, and shocked made him more real than anyone else, and he was elevated to a status far above what anyone could have reasonably expected at the time. Mainly because many people felt like he was one of us, a regular guy who just so happened to become a star. I think in some ways, without him, we wouldn't be so open to crazy explicit content in music and pop culture in general today. That combination made the Marshall Mathers LP the fastest selling album by a solo artist in history at the time, the second best selling album of the year, the Grammy for Best Rap Album, the Grammy for Best Rap Solo Performance, and the 17th best selling album of all time as of 2024, with 30 million copies sold worldwide. And so now Eminem stood at a painful crossroads. Would he heal or continue drowning in his own trauma to stay on top of the game, no matter what it cost him?
I haven't had more than a 2-day break. Even if I take a break, I'll start writing and I can't control the thoughts. That's my worst fear. That I'll wake up tomorrow and won't be able to write. That if there's not drama and negativity in my life, all my songs will be really whack and boring or something.
The character that made Eminem's first 2 albums is a cartoon. Slim Shady is crazy and scary, and even his vulnerability comes off as exaggerated. Because trying to express himself sincerely is the reason why the first few years of Eminem's career were a disaster in the first place. No one cared at all about Infinite, the album where he poured his heart out and got laughed at for it. So could Marshall even afford to show off more of his true self? It's an important question, but unfortunately it's one that he only asked after getting very close to losing his family and freedom. On June 3rd, 2000, Eminem pistol whipped a man that he found making out with his wife Kim outside of a bar in Detroit. The very next day, he pulled out a gun on a member of a rap group he had a feud with. Suddenly, the fictional character Slim Shady had spilled out into real life, and the consequences were no longer just criticism and panic from the general public. He was now facing real criminal charges with the possibility of jail time. On top of that, just 2 months later, he got divorced from his wife Kim and was facing lawsuits and protests against his music by LGBT and women's groups at the same time. So it wasn't long until Eminem was forced to wake up. First, he was getting booked at the police station. In the middle of processing him into the jail, the cops started asking him for autographs. He realized in that moment that portraying this Slim Shady character was ruining him. People didn't see Eminem as a human being. He had become a spectacle to be laughed at and not much else. Even worse, his chaotic persona erased the real reason he started on this journey with music in the first place. More than being a troubled guy looking for an outlet, Marshall was a father trying to provide a future for his daughter. If that meant he had to wreck his life to come up with compelling material and become someone he never meant to be, he was still ready to do it.
I didn't know what was going to happen to me. I thought I was going to jail. But the scariest thought was, how am I going to tell this to Haley? What am I going to say? Daddy's going away and he's bad and you have to come visit him in jail? I never told her anything because if there was a slim chance that I'd get off, then I didn't want to put her through that emotionally. Being scared. She hates when I go away. Anytime.
Nothing could make him stop, unless Haley was in danger. Marshall stopped drinking and popping pills. He grew more cautious of his public image, trying to remind people that Slim Shady wasn't real, at least not that real. He started working on an album that would show more of the real, sincere Eminem, the human being whose life had been turned into a reality show. The announcement of that album, The Eminem Show, asked more questions than it answered. Would people respond well to seeing the real Marshall Mathers? Would people care at all? Are they interested in who he truly is? What I can say for sure is that that album again sold almost 1.5 million copies in its first week. The Eminem Show is much less dark than his previous albums, but it's just as emotionally powerful, if not more. Musically, Eminem handled a lot of the production. We hear more melodies and a refined pop shine to the previously gritty rap tracks. Conceptually and lyrically, though, Eminem is now a jaded superstar. He's here to be self-aware and real and open up about all the ways in which his fame has affected him, positively and negatively. Of course, The Eminem Show doesn't drop Eminem's volatile humor. He still talks about his divorce with Kim with a mix of school shooter bitterness and 4chan jokes on Superman. On the more real side, there are songs like White America, where he talks about the politics around his career as a white rapper in a black genre. Apart from the advantages he got, he points out that the white audiences didn't care about him when he was in the underground. It was only after the cosign from Dr. Dre that suddenly white people love Eminem more than hip-hop. In Cleaning Out My Closet, he tells the story of his family trauma, from being abandoned by his father to being told by his mother that she wished he had died instead of his uncle Ronnie. But most importantly, The Eminem Show shows the world who Marshall Bruce Mathers III really is. A father before anything else. For Marshall, all this struggle he's been through in life only strengthened his resolve to make sure that Haley gets every bit of love and security she needs. He sings for his daughter in Haley's song. Then he has her sing the chorus for My Dad's Gone Crazy.
There's nothing you could do or say that could ever change me.
I think my dad's gone crazy.
There's no one on earth that can save me, not even Haley.
I think my dad's gone crazy.
Haley is, whether she's with me or not, she's with me every day. She has been my main source of drive and motivation, especially when she was first born. I think that really kicked me in the ass harder than anything. Can't be a failure. I can't have her grow up and not be able to say her dad succeeded. She's all I got in this world.
The Eminem Show was a massive commercial and critical success. Commercially, it was the best-selling album of 2002 worldwide, with a massive 27 million units sold. And beyond 2002, it even became the second best-selling album of the 21st century so far. Critically, it won the Grammy for Best Rap Album and got a 9.1 rating from Pitchfork. Looking back now, being Gen Z, not understanding the obsession people had with Eminem back in the day, I was only 2 years old when this album came out, it's pretty unbelievable that someone who gets laughed at so much now could make one of the most critically acclaimed best-selling albums of the decade back then. Most importantly, this album proved that Eminem's audience really cared enough about him to value Marshall, and that Slim Shady wasn't just a gimmick or a meme or a trend. People valued Marshall, his thoughts, his writing, his experiences. At the same time, he avoided jail time for his gun charges, he ended up getting put on probation, and was able to continue his career like normal. So how did things quickly end up getting even worse? Well, sometimes it can feel almost impossible to undo decades of dysfunction, trauma, and damage. Even the smallest mistake can send you back years. And so while Eminem was trying to grow and move forward and leave the Slim Shady side of his personality behind, what he didn't realize was that if Slim Shady was going down, he was going to take Eminem with him. Around the same time he released The Eminem Show, Eminem was cast as the lead actor in 8 Mile, a film named after the infamously run-down section of Detroit that Eminem grew up in, following a fictionalized story of his journey towards stardom. Working on set for 16 hours a day, early mornings, late nights, that all led to struggling with insomnia and low energy. It was hard work. Adding on to that, given how stressed he was with his family situation, his lawsuits, his controversies, a lot of the time, the only way he could sleep at night was by taking Ambien. But life went on. He finished the movie and it went on to win an Oscar. It got ranked as one of the best films of the year, and it made hundreds of millions of dollars at the box office. In a lot of ways, at the time, Eminem was bigger than hip-hop itself. He was a truly mainstream pop culture icon. At the same time, he signed an up-and-coming New York artist called 50 Cent as one of the first artists on Shady Records. Yes, one of the kings of New York rap in the early 2000s originally got his big break after being discovered by Eminem. What I'm trying to say is that in 2002, Eminem's career was at an all-time high, but Marshall's life was still pretty shitty. The idea came to him that maybe he should retire and focus more on his family. He was already famous, he was already rich, and even more than just his daughter who was now in elementary school, he was also raising other people's kids like Kim's niece and even his own half-brother Nathan, who was 13 years younger than him and had spent years bouncing around the foster care system until now, when Marshall finally had the means to help him out. So the plan was to make one last album, retire on a high note, and then go off to support his family. So in 2003, he started working on Encore. But when he reached about the halfway point in making the album and finally felt pretty consistently satisfied with his creative output, most of what he had made got leaked. Eminem had given his half-brother Nate a copy of the songs, and one of Nate's friends ended up leaking the whole thing online. This was a pretty big gut punch because Marshall was going through so much in his life at the time that he didn't have it in him mentally to put serious effort into new material. Kim was always in and out of jail, his uncle Todd went on to commit suicide, and eventually, the Ambien that had been giving him peace and quiet a few months back came around to collect its dues. Like with all drugs, the benefits were short-lived, and a tolerance grew. He soon needed much bigger doses than before just to feel normal. He had even started adding Valium and Vicodin to his daily dosage.
I had writer's block for 4 years and it drove me fucking crazy. No matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't think of shit. The pills had a lot to do with it. Just wiping out brain cells. I don't know if it sounds like I'm making excuses, but the absolute truth is, a lot of my memory is gone. I don't know if you've ever taken Ambien, but it's kind of a memory eraser. That shit wiped out 5 years of my life. People will tell me stories and it's like, I did that? I saw myself doing this thing on BET recently, and I was like, when was that?
But he pushed through anyway and finished making Encore, and the album sounds exactly like Marshall's state of mind at the time. It feels tired, broken, demotivated, and barely lucid. Right after his last album sold 30 million copies, he's rapping on Encore about poop and vomit and losing his mind on the mic. On the album cover, we see Eminem bowing with a gun held behind his back. But even he admits it's one of his worst projects. People mostly call it uneven. Some of it was good, some of it was bad, but overall, it's just not nearly as great as the 3 albums that came before it. The lead single, Just Lose It, mocks Michael Jackson, alludes to his scandals, and other goofy tracks like Big Weenie, Rain Man, and Ass Like That are also just not funny. And I don't mean in a they're offensive way, I just mean that they're genuinely boring. Eminem went on to say that a lot of the leaked tracks like We As Americans, Love You More, and Evil Deeds would have led to a completely different, much better album. But most of the songs on Encore don't have that much replay value. Unless you love Eminem so much that you'd even listen to him read the telephone book, it's just not that great of a project.
Motherfuckers, the dominoes, I'm on the roll, around and around I go. When will I stop? I don't know. Trying to pick up where the Eminem show left off, but I know anything's possible. Though I'm not gonna top, but I sold. I'm at the top of my game. That shit is not gonna change. Long as I got like a Dre on my team, I'll get away with murder. I'm like OJ. He's like
There are a few tracks I like a lot, like Evil Deeds, Yellow Brick Road, like Toy Soldiers. They're all good. Even Mockingbird might be my favorite track from Encore. Marshall's state of being tired, broken, and barely holding on to his life worked in favor on that song. Amidst all of the chaos in his life, he simply talks to his family, assuring them that everything's going to be okay.
All the things growing up as daddy that he had to see. Daddy don't want you to see, but you see just as much as he did. We did not plan it to be this way, your mother and me, but things have got so bad between us. I don't see us ever being together ever again, like we used to be when we was teenagers. But then of course everything always happens for a reason. I guess it was never meant to be, but it's just...
Despite the quality issues though, enough of white America seemed to love Eminem so much that they listened to just about anything he released at this point. Encore sold around 800,000 copies in its first week, and it went platinum in less than 10 days. And Encore was supposed to be the final Eminem album. He was either going to retire or take a long break, but what he didn't expect was that he would be forced to. In this moment, at the end of 2004, things just got worse. His drug addiction became more serious, he gained about 80 pounds in a year, and in 2006, he lost his best friend Proof, who had held him down for years when he was just starting out as a nobody in Detroit. The club where Proof died sat right next to the 8 Mile roadway in Detroit, and in some ways, this symbolic full circle is pretty freaky. It feels a lot like Marshall's life may have kept moving forward, but still in many ways stayed stuck where he started for a long time. Proof's death in 2006 meant that Marshall had lost his biggest rock, someone he could always trust to have his back. When they were kids in Detroit, Proof not only mentored Marshall in rapping, he not only helped Marshall be accepted by the black crowd in the battle rap scene, but he also taught Marshall to stand up for himself. At first, Marshall couldn't cope with his passing. There were days where he wouldn't leave his bed. He even wouldn't go to the bathroom. He stress ate, reaching 220 pounds. He spent most days crying and then numbing himself with pills. By the end of 2007, he himself nearly died from an accidental methadone overdose. And that's what finally gave him the clarity to get fully clean, a journey he's been on for the last 16 plus years. Fast forward to now, and Eminem's done the best possible job in turning his life around. He's still active in music and challenging himself, but most importantly, he's made sure that his daughter grew up to be secure, healthy, and happy. 28 years after Marshall almost killed himself, living as a nobody in one of the worst areas of Detroit with only $40 to buy a gift for his kid, in May of 2024, his daughter got married. It's a wonderful, inspiring story. Marshall really did put an end to a cycle of trauma and misery. But that doesn't change the fact that his music after 2002 is just bad. At his peak, Eminem's music wasn't something you had to rationalize and nitpick to realize it was great. Great art smacks you in the face, it wakes you up, and that's what Eminem always did. That's what he lost after the early 2000s. Recovery, despite being a bland, watery train wreck, somehow became the best-selling album of 2010 across all genres. It's overly poppy and boring, crossed with lyrical, miracle rapping. Both sides of it suck. Other albums he's made since then, like Revival and Kamikaze, are even worse. At best, some of his outputs since then, like the Marshall Mathers LP2, are kind of nice, not bad, but not great either. He still has not reached what he used to be capable of, not even close. But luckily for Eminem, his commercial success has never failed, and he's still one of the most streamed rappers every year, despite putting out mostly trash for almost 20 years straight. But the question that always comes up is, if he's so skilled, if he's such a talented artist, if he works so hard, and if he's still so famous, why does he continue to put out mostly garbage music?
And there is something, I'm not gonna lie, there is something inside me that is a little more happy when I'm angry. As bad as it feels to be there, there's also something about it, there's a rush of it that I like.
Eminem has been combative to his core ever since he was a teenager, years before the fame. But it isn't like you can blame him. When you're a child who goes through so much darkness, being powerless to do anything about it, your brain chemistry can be rewritten to need conflict to feel normal. It's a curse and a blessing. But it's also the magic we saw in his first 3 albums. He was fighting on every song because that's the life he knew. Whether it was his toxic family, his childhood bullies, the poverty, the music industry, politicians, the general public, anyone who tried to test him, he was ready to go. And it worked back then. Because what he was talking about was raw. He was a poor, troubled white guy, finally having become someone through his rapping, while also living in an otherwise plastic factory of celebrities. He embraced his filth, instead of pretending to be glamorous or perfect. People loved it, and it's kept him famous for 25 years. But being 50 years old now, Eminem lost that edge. He has everything. He has respect, money, legacy. The one thing he doesn't have is a need for conflict, because he ran out of fuel for his hatred. That angry rapping he does, it feels weird when all he's talking about is how he rhymes great and he hates mumble rappers. From being genuinely horrifying, unpredictable, and controversial in the past, Eminem in his 50s now is an old man yelling at kids. This especially has come across in some of the music he's made since the late 2010s, like Revival, Kamikaze, Music to be Murdered By, all of which have gotten the lowest reviews of any albums he's ever made, mostly because they're out of touch and boring. Deep down though, it seems like Eminem knows that. Even he predicted this back in 2002.
Failure has always been the biggest motivation to me. The fear of losing and somebody getting the last laugh on me. That's how I've based my whole career. The truth is, this could end tomorrow. Fans are so fickle and so quick to turn on you too. Suddenly you're not cool no more. You're like the crisscross jeans or something, even if at first you're the greatest thing since sliced cunt.
Simply put, it's just hard to continue the same level of creativity as a 100-millionaire celebrity compared to when you were a broke nobody living on 8 Mile Road in Detroit. But those experiences that gave Eminem creative fuel and made him who he was also led him to a dark place. After the hell he went through during the peak of his fame, to the extent of nearly losing his life to an overdose, it's understandable that he might feel it's more important to let go of that time in his life rather than continue to write about it. Slim Shady might have made him famous, but living in that mode was killing him. Even more than all of that though is what I and everyone else loved most about prime Eminem. It was never his fast flows, the technical skills, the wordplay. That was great, but what made Eminem Eminem was the vivid storytelling, the grotesque fantasies, the wild humor, the relatability. I love those first albums he made, even as someone who's Gen Z and didn't live in that era. They're completely unmatched. The raw perspectives, the compelling stories, the wild humor, they're great albums. Fast forward to the last 10 years and it feels like Eminem is so much more focused on rapping super fast or coming up with strange rhymes than actually telling compelling stories. Most of his albums fall completely flat. Without a real narrative, a lot of his music has become irritating and boring. In 2002, Eminem was the controversial people's hero. He said stuff that people were really thinking but no one wanted to admit. He was really real. A lot of the time, he genuinely did piss people off and offend them, but he also changed the pop culture landscape forever. And his fan base from that time has stuck with him, keeping him one of the most popular rappers alive for over 20 years. More so than any controversy he generated back then, people remember him as being a great artist. But now he's an old man yelling at the clouds and accusing people of hating him who weren't even thinking about him at all. And it's been going on for years. Obviously, there was a decline in quality when he started making crappy pop rap back in 2010 with Recovery, but he didn't become egregiously openly out of touch until I would say around 2017. Until then, he was getting a lot of hate from people who thought he was too boring and too watered down, but it seems like right when he released Revival, often considered the worst album he ever made, the backlash from that made him turn into a kind of half-baked villain character that he's been ever since. And now, the death of Slim Shady, his first album in 4 years, seems to be sticking with that trend. The marketing for this new project has been focused on one thing: cancel culture. The thing is though, the last time Eminem did anything worth getting canceled for was well over 20 years ago. Now that he's gotten sober, gone off to focus on family, gotten well into his 50s, and stayed out of the limelight for 2 decades, there's no controversy left. Eminem has been writing shock value lyrics for so long that there's no one left to shock. His hardcore millennial fans and even Eminem himself have been talking endlessly about how Gen Z wants to cancel Eminem and make him politically correct and all of this nonsense. Look at the stats I was listing off throughout this video. Eminem is the most streamed rapper in the world right now. He's still breaking streaming records 25 years into his career with Houdini, the song where he claims that people are trying to cancel him. If that was the case, it clearly isn't going well. But it's not. The death of Slim Shady is full of jokes about transgender people, cancel culture, all of these other controversial statements that just feel forced because it's not actually shocking. Repeatedly rapping about annoying feminists, Bruce Jenner, free speech, Gen Z, none of this means anything. It feels like a Dave Chappelle stand-up special. It's boring. If the only person talking about you getting canceled is you, it's not even happening. And I get Slim Shady is back. He's crazy and wacky. Eminem hasn't really rapped as Slim Shady in a very long time, but it doesn't hit the same anymore. And then on the song Habits, where he starts rapping about saying the F word for gay, but he doesn't even say the word, then goes on a tangent about beating up midgets before again talking about getting canceled for the 20th time, or on Fuel people when he raps about how he has more energy than ever before and how people are scared of him being as big as he is. Who is he talking to? On paper, he's literally the most popular rapper alive. Who are Eminem's enemies? On Guilty Conscience 2, he has an argument with Slim Shady, going back and forth, making fun of deaf people, making fun of fat people, making fun of blind people. He makes his 500th reference to Christopher Reeves. He talks about getting attacked in the media, making fun of mumble rappers, people who don't even care about him. Eminem has the biggest fan base in rap. It's bigger than the genre itself, and people only dislike him because they find him boring. You can only say offensive things so many times in a row before it ceases to be offensive and just ends up kind of trite and unoriginal. In 2002, Eminem offended a lot of people with a Slim Shady character, but he also rapped compelling stories about the pressure of fame after growing up in poverty, raising his family in the spotlight, dealing with addiction. His wordplay was offensive but funny, and the offensiveness was never the focal point. In 2024, he's writing entire verses about beating up midgets. It's not controversial, it's silly. No one is writing articles about why Eminem needs to be canceled because it's Eminem. He's done this trick before, 20 times before. No one is offended. This type of stuff is so common that it's not shocking at all. Eminem is the person who made it common in the first place. People have only tried to cancel Eminem for one reason in the last 15 years, because his music sucks now. No one is offended by anything he says or does other than for one reason, that it sounds boring. But at the same time, again, I want to say no matter how bad Eminem's lyrics may have gotten in the eyes of the music community, his commercial success has never failed. Every one of his albums since 2000 has debuted at #1 on the Billboard charts, even the ones that people hated. He's still one of the most streamed rappers every year despite putting out mostly garbage for almost 20 years. And right now, he has more monthly listeners than Drake. He's the 8th most streamed artist in the world in any genre despite not making good music in 2 decades. His latest single, Houdini, proves that he's still a hitmaker. It's the second rap song that ever reached 150 million streams in under 3 weeks. He literally has the biggest fan base of any rapper ever. And all of that glazing just goes to show that him talking about getting canceled, being offensive, being controversial, how Gen Z doesn't like him, it's a marketing scheme. It just makes him sound out of touch because it clearly isn't true. All criticism aside, it's really inspiring to see Eminem still push himself into the 2020s and still try to compete even when he has all the money and the prestige already. He obviously just loves rapping and he happens to be really good at it. His musical legacy is undeniable as well. There are countless great modern artists like Kendrick, J. Cole, J.I.D., even Usher and more who have said that Eminem had a huge influence on their work. And the death of Slim Shady isn't bad. I actually thought it was pretty solid. Like, it's way better than anything Eminem has done in years. It doesn't sound rough or boring at all. It's actually insane he can make something this good at 50 years old when most artists would be completely out of energy at this point in their careers. It feels like it's easily in the top 4 or 5 of his entire discography because he just put that much effort into it. But it still feels out of touch. You'd hope that Eminem would be over the cheap rage baiting for drama, but instead it feels like you're listening to Steven Crowder do a stand-up set. It feels like you're listening to Fox News on top of a Dr. Dre beat. It's not that the concept is bad. Making fun of society is fine, but Eminem doesn't execute that idea as well as he did anymore. Or it's just that the way he does it isn't relevant the same way it used to be. I will say that the death of Slim Shady is easily the best thing he's made in 20 years, but it is still corny for him to act like people are canceling him for being offensive, when in reality, the only thing you could really cancel him for is making bad albums for 20 years straight. If Eminem, and more importantly Marshall, could finally outgrow Slim Shady, the side of him that brings destruction wherever he goes and hurts the people around him for his own personal gain, he might be able to make some of the best songs he's ever done. Did he do that on the death of Slim Shady? For the 8th album in a row, I'm going to say no. And it's especially noticeable because of how the times have changed. But what I do know is that his legacy is completely solidified and he's still going to go down as one of the greatest to ever do it, no matter how corny he becomes. And hey, at least the death of Slim Shady is a pretty fun listen. I think the most powerful part of Eminem's entire story is that he just kept going. No matter what you think of him, hero or villain, he was determined to get out of Detroit and change his life forever. And he did. That's why artists like him are the main inspiration for the spirit of creativity, the latest piece from my jewelry brand, Spirit World. I made this brand and these necklaces to remind everyone that the only way to reach your goal is to just keep going. The jewelry is a meaningful reminder that the journey of life is the reward. The Spirit of Creativity is a solid silver pendant painted with a brilliant blue enamel background and fastened with deep blue gemstones. And we just relaunched it after we completely sold out last month. I've been on YouTube inspiring people with stories for 5 years now, and I'm making my own creations and my own brand to continue that mission. I've seen enough to know that you aren't going to get lucky. You aren't going to blow up overnight. You aren't going to walk into heaven without having gone through hell to get there. That's why I wear these necklaces every single day. The power of the necklace reminds me that the only thing crazier than focusing on my goals is sitting on my ass doing nothing. We're all sitting here watching videos about successful artists and people who make music that changes the world. I want to motivate all of you to pursue your own dreams and never give up. The necklace is a symbol of that belief. There isn't success without failure. Whatever you want to be, a rapper, a producer, a photographer, student, writer, entrepreneur, anything. The sun rises every day and we all get a new chance to work hard and embrace our own adventure, and Spirit World is the jewelry that represents that story. So right now, the Spirit of Creativity is available again and with free shipping in the US. As a thank you for watching this far into the video, you can use the code Volksgang for a discount on your order. So go to spiritworld.store, show some huge support to Volksgeist, and get a beautiful piece of jewelry. Thank you so much for your support. Once again, that's spiritworld.store.